Okay, doing a book tag today. I got tagged by Dane Reeds, and the tag is a new kind of summer tag. So it's probably obvious already from my voice, but I've got a bit of a cold here, which is why my voice sounds a little bit froggy at the moment. I've got a hot lime juice here, which I'm going to drink periodically to kind of soothe my throat. Apologies in advance. This might get a little bit rough trying to get through this on my rough voice, but I want to give it a go anyways. So, question number 1. Start by recommending a book from the country you're in now, as close as you can find to the place you are. So, I'm an American, but I'm actually living in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. So I guess because that's where I am now, I have to recommend a book from Vietnam or Ho Chi Minh City, which actually, with apologies, I have a hard time doing because I haven't, to the best of my memory, read any books by Vietnamese authors, even in English translation. Which, now that I've actually said that, makes me feel a little bit bad. Like I've been a bad expatriate. I should have investigated more the local culture. In my defense, though, it's a bit hard to find here in Ho Chi Minh City. There are some English bookstores, but they don't carry... there aren't a lot of Vietnamese books in English translation which seem to be floating around, at least not here in Ho Chi Minh City. For whatever reason, I'm not sure... I'm sure it's for a variety of reasons. I'm sure government control at least plays a part in it. Markability maybe plays another part. Maybe there's not a big demand for Vietnamese books in English translation. The one book that you see everywhere is The Sorrows of War by Bao Nin, which has been described as the Vietnamese version of All Quiet on the Western Front. It was actually banned for a long period, but is now banned inside of Vietnam. It's now unbanned. I think in part because it had gotten so many awards abroad that the government went from something they were trying to control to something actually they wanted to get the recognition for. And I see it everywhere, and I even have a copy somewhere in this apartment because somebody gave me a copy and said, I think you really should read this. Everybody says you should really read this, but it's really depressing. And whenever somebody says this book is really depressing to me, it doesn't mean I'm not going to read it. I do read depressing stuff from time to time, but it sure gets moved to the bottom of the pile. I'm not like, I can't wait to read this, it's so depressing. The stuff I really can't wait to start tends to be sold to me with other adjectives than it's really depressing. So, all that is a long way of saying I've not read any books from the country I'm in. The best I can do is recommend a book which was written in Vietnam, or at least written by somebody who had been in Vietnam, but wasn't Vietnamese, and that's The Quiet American by Greene. Now, even this book, this is as close as I can get to the criteria here. I've got to recommend it with caution because there are some things I liked and there are some things I didn't like. Things I didn't like. I like Greene generally. I do. But this book, the plot over-relied on coincidence and contrivance. And the characters were not three-dimensional, living, breathing characters. They were caricatures of certain points of view. So that's on the negative. On the positive, Greene always writes readable prose. So even though this wasn't his best book, it's relatively easy to get through, and it flows from one page to the other. And I think he does do a very good job of evoking the feel of 1950s Saigon. Talking about being on the street corner and seeing the women walk by with the owie eyes, the traditional Vietnamese clothing and all that. He creates a nice scene there of Vietnam. Oh, and for what it's worth, the politics of this book are exactly right. It's amazing how back in the early 1950s, he already realized what it was going to take the American government another 20 years to realize, which is that there was no pro-American force that could be modeled into a nation here in Vietnam. So he was way ahead of his time on that one. Okay, number 2, recommend a book from a different country or area of the country? Okay, having already admitted that I haven't read any Vietnamese books, I can't do another area of the country. So I'll do a different country, which is Palace Walk by Naguib Mahfouz. I've already reviewed it on this channel. It's an Egyptian book. It is absolutely wonderful. It talks about life in Egypt during the 1910s, around the time of World War I. Egypt under the colonial rule by the British. And it's an Egyptian family, and you just get to know this family and all their lives and their habits so intimately. It really gives you a great insight into a completely different time and a completely different culture. Recommend a book that reminds you of summers when you were young. So I wasn't exactly sure how to interpret this question. Did this mean a book that I remembered reading during the summers when I was young, like the reading experience, or a book that was very similar to my own childhood, you know, the content of the book being similar to my own childhood? Actually, my own childhood was extremely boring. Lived out in the suburbs. Mom and Dad were working a lot, did not get out of the house much at all, or at least not out of our suburban yard. So I'm not going to try and find a book that replicates that experience. But some books I remember reading during the summers when I was young. So it's funny how things fade out of your memory, isn't it? I was thinking, okay, what did I read in the summers when I was young? I read a ton of junk. You know, I remember saving up my money to buy these big comic book compendium collections. I don't want to talk about a comic book. Was a huge Star Trek fan, so I read a lot of those pocketbook Star Trek books that were around during the 90s. But two books I can talk about that I remember reading in middle school up at summer camp was 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne and The Jungle Books by Rudyard Kipling, both of which I read in middle school at summer camps, both of which I haven't read since then, although in both cases I'm probably overdue to revisit it. 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I was reading this at family camp where it was on the lake. So, you know, it's funny. I remember the surroundings better than the book. I mean, I remember trying to read this book on this green grass next to the lake, or, you know, going in the lake and then coming back to read the book for a while. All those mental images come back to me when I think about this book, reading it during the summer. The book itself I actually was not a big fan of. I slogged my way through it dutifully, but I found it painfully boring. I think I'm probably due for a reread of it because, well, yeah, let me back up. That book kept me away from Jules Verne for about 20 years. But then I came back to Jules Verne and I read Around the World in 80 Days, which I found absolutely delightful. A really fun, really readable book. And Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was a little bit of a slog, but also really good in parts. Which makes me think that maybe I'm due to check out 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea again and see if it's as boring as I remember. I've been told by people actually that it is as boring as I remember. But I should check it out for myself again and see. The other book, The Jungle Books, I remember reading at camp, and this was in Michigan. There was some sort of state law, maybe it's a federal law, I don't know, that when kids are at camp, they have to spend 1 hour every day in the bed just resting. So, you know, you'd go out and do activities, and then by state law or federal law or whatever, we had to spend 1 hour in the beds. Where we would eat candy and read books. And so I remember reading this book on the bed at camp while eating candy. And again, when I picture this book in my head, I just picture this dirty cabin and the white sheets on the bed and stuff like that. But The Jungle Book I absolutely loved. And And I really can't talk intelligently about it at this distance removed because I haven't read it since then. But I remember reading it and thinking, oh wow, this is really great. It's interesting. It was really easy to read, and I didn't think it was going to be easy to read because it was like a 19th century book, so I thought it was, the prose was going to be antiquated and stuff like that. But I remember it being so easy and fun to read. Steve Donoghue just did a book on the Jungle Books. He apparently reads it all the time, so it's very fresh in his mind at all times. So I'm definitely overdue to go back and reread the Jungle Books at some point. So yeah, both of those on my list to reread at some point. Okay. Number 4, recommend a book from a country you visited before. The Gift of Rain by, I forgot the author's name. I forgot the author's name. I'll put it in the description down below, or you can Google it. I'll write it down in the description down below. But The Gift of Rain, again, this is, with apologies, this is a book that it's a mixed recommendation. I didn't like the prose style so much, and I thought there were elements of the story that were contrived. But it's by a Malaysian author. It takes place in Penang, and Penang is a really interesting place because it's the history of Malaysia is really interesting because you have the Malay people, the indigenous people, who are quite similar in culture to Indonesia, and then you have the British colony, British colonized it, and then you have lots of Chinese and Indian immigrants. So in Penang had a heavy British influence for a long time. This was one of kind of the first islands that the British colonized. So he's writing this book about Penang during World War II, and I was traveling through Penang as I was reading it. And there's so much local flavor in the book, and it gives you such a feel for the culture, that I was so glad I was reading this book while I was traveling through Penang, traveling around Penang. So, yeah, even though there were elements of the book that I thought that I didn't like so much, I recommend it definitely as a great travel book. And I know nobody's traveling this summer because of Corona, but if you want to get a feel for Malaysia or Penang specifically, recommend this one. Number 5, recommend a book from a country you'd like to visit next. So Dane Reeds, person who tagged me, is from Britain, and he's never been to America, and so he was recommending, his book for this is, I'm blanking on the name now, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Sorry, that was one of those things. It's such an iconic book, but I momentarily blanked on the name. Now, I've never been to England, where he was from, and I'd really like to go there someday. And I was thinking, okay, what's the British version of On the Road by Jack Kerouac? And I don't know, actually. If somebody knows, let me know. But I was thinking maybe Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell might be kind of the equivalent of On the Road. The story of kind of traveling and bumming it and not quite hitchhiking, but slumming it in these areas. Now, it's not only England, it's Paris and London, but I've never been to either, and I'd like to go to both of them, so I'm going to count this. And then number 6, recommend a book from the furthest away place you can find. So I was thinking, what is the furthest away place to me? Because, I'm from America, and America is my home. So, I mean, geographically, right now, I'm living in Vietnam. I guess America might be the furthest away. It's all the way on the other side of the world, but I'm from America. So, is it the furthest away from Vietnam, or the furthest away from America, or I don't know. And I thought, well, Russia. Russia's a good distance from Vietnam, kind of north to south, and it's also a good distance away from America. And there are tons of good Russian books to recommend. And War and Peace, which, I mean, I hate to be that guy who's recommending War and Peace, but no, actually, I don't hate to be that guy. I'm going to recommend War and Peace. It's a wonderful book, and a lot of people don't read it because they're intimidated by it, including me. I put it off reading it for many, many years, but once you finally get into it, it's not difficult. The characters are very relatable. It's long, but you know, we read long stuff all the time. I mean, the Harry Potter series is long. Just take your time with it, savor it, enjoy it. Don't be in a hurry to finish it, and you'll quite enjoy War and Peace if you give it a chance. Okay, so I'm going to tag Books of Blood, formerly Written in Blood, J. Shea, The Archive, formerly Graham Quigley, and Elizabeth Tyree. All consider yourself tagged on this, and looking forward to seeing some of your videos, hopefully.